It was nearly 3 in the morning when the knock came. Sharp, insistent, and completely out of place. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The rhythmic bang, bang, bang against my front door echoed through the quiet of my house, rattling the nerves I didn't even know I had left after a long week. I reached for my phone and checked the time. Who the hell knocks at someone's door at that hour? I groaned, pushed the blanket off, and slipped on my hoodie. The glow of my living room TV was still bouncing off the walls, a paused episode of some true crime documentary frozen mid-scene. I glanced toward the front door and then opened my Ring app. My heart did that weird little hiccup when I saw her. Karen. Pink, fuzzy robe, one slipper slightly off her heel, arms folded like she had just caught someone trespassing on her private beach. Her blonde bob was frizzed out like she'd just wrestled her pillow and lost. Of course, it was Karen, my lovely HOA president, a woman who thought the title gave her divine authority over every blade of grass and parked vehicle within the subdivision. I opened the door just a crack, still not over the sheer absurdity of what was happening. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Yes," she said immediately, like she'd been rehearsing the conversation in her head. "I need you to move your truck. My guests are here for my daughter's engagement brunch, and they need somewhere to park." I blinked, trying to process both the request and the fact that she was dead serious. "I'm sorry, what?" She huffed like I was being slow on purpose. "Your driveway. You're not using it right now, so I told them they could park there. It's just for a few hours, and they flew in from Florida. I really need you to move your truck." I stared at her. "It's 3 a.m. "Yes," she said again, like I was the one being unreasonable. "And they just landed. They're driving over now. Can you move it, please?" The audacity didn't even come with sugar. Just straight black coffee Karen audacity. "You told your guests they could park in my driveway without asking me?" "It's just for tonight," she said, looking annoyed now. "Why are you making this difficult? You don't have company. I checked." "You checked?" "I noticed," she corrected, like that was any better. I took a deep breath, trying not to laugh. "No, I'm not moving it. I don't care who's flying in or what imaginary brunch is happening. It's my driveway." Karen's face tightened. Her jaw twitched. "I don't think you understand how this neighborhood works." "I understand just fine. I pay dues like everyone else. That doesn't mean you get to hand out parking passes for my driveway like it's public property." Her arms flailed slightly as her frustration started spilling out. "You're being incredibly rude right now. I'm just trying to welcome my daughter's future in-laws. This is supposed to be a special weekend." "Then maybe host it during daylight hours," I said, fully leaning into the absurdity of the moment. "Also, brunch isn't at 3 a.m. Karen looked like she wanted to argue that too, but ran out of logical roads to travel. Her expression shifted, tightening into something more calculating. "Are you refusing to move your vehicle?" "Oh, absolutely," I said with a small, polite smile that I knew would drive her nuts. "Good night." I started to close the door, and she muttered something I couldn't quite catch, but I caught the tone. Sharp, petty, threatening. I locked the door, turned off the TV, but I didn't go back to sleep. I couldn't. Something about her expression had stuck with me. Karen was used to getting her way. She wasn't going to let this go. I didn't know what game she was playing exactly, but I could tell this wasn't about parking anymore. My truck wasn't blocking her driveway. It wasn't parked illegally. I'd made sure it was dead center in my own space. But for her to come out at 3 a.m., pounding on my door like there was a fire? That wasn't normal Karen behavior. That was something more. Something off. I paced a bit, glanced out the window, saw nothing but shadows and my truck sitting peacefully under the streetlight. But deep in my gut, I knew that night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The night had barely moved into early morning when the first flash of red and blue lights hit my window. At first, I thought it was just another random squad car rolling through. But no, this wasn't a passing cruiser. The lights were stationary, slicing through the quiet of the neighborhood with a force that sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. I scrambled to the window and saw 2 squad cars parked on the street, their sirens barely audible, but the lights flashing in a rhythm that made my heart race. Through the swirling lights, I could see Karen, standing in front of the nearest patrol car, talking animatedly to one of the officers. Her hand gestures were wild, like she was telling them some dramatic story I wasn't part of. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. Her face was twisted in a way that screamed victim, and I knew exactly what had happened. I wasn't about to let her pull me into whatever mess she was trying to create, so I stepped back from the window and grabbed my phone. I started recording, just in case. Sure enough, the officers took a few steps toward my house. One of them knocked at my door. I opened it, and immediately the two of them took their place on the porch, their faces unreadable. "Sir, are you the owner of the truck parked in the driveway?" the officer asked, his tone neutral. I nodded. "Yeah, that's me." "I'm Officer Matthews, and this is Officer Thompson. We received a call about a disturbance here." He paused, glancing at the flashing lights on the street. "Is everything all right?" I didn't know whether to laugh or be irritated. Everything was fine until Karen knocked on my door at 3 a.m., demanding I move my truck so her guests could park here. I told her no. That's it. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You refuse to move your truck?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's my property, my driveway. I don't know what kind of game she's playing, but that was the end of it." A brief silence hung in the air as the officers exchanged looks. Then they turned to Karen, who was now watching us from the sidewalk with an exaggerated pout, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked like she was preparing for a showdown. Her eyes locked on mine with an intensity I wasn't expecting. I knew the routine by now. Karen had been known to stir up drama in the neighborhood before, but this time was different. There was something in the way she was holding herself that made me wonder if she had something up her sleeve. "We'll need to speak to her," Officer Matthews said. He motioned for me to step back as they walked toward Karen, and I heard her start talking before they even reached her. "I don't know why you're questioning him," she said in that self-righteous tone of hers. "I came here to ask him a simple favor, and he's being completely unreasonable. He threatened me. He was rude and belligerent. I fear for my safety." My jaw nearly hit the floor. Threatened her? I hadn't even raised my voice. I hadn't done anything but say no, but I knew better than to argue with Karen when she was on one of her rants. I stood back, watching as the officers listened to her with their usual professional patience, nodding as though they hadn't heard her say the same things 1,000 times before. The more Karen talked, the more absurd her claims sounded. She described how I yelled at her, how I refused to move my vehicle, how I cursed at her, and closed the door in her face. It was like she had an entire script ready to go. Meanwhile, the officers didn't look convinced, but they were also careful not to dismiss her outright. I pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocked it, and opened the Ring app. "Actually," I said calmly, "I have footage of our conversation. I'd be happy to show it to you." Karen's eyes flickered for a moment. She didn't like that. I could see the shift in her expression as she realized I had proof, real proof, of what had actually happened. The officers didn't say much. They let me show them the video. The whole thing played out clearly. Karen knocking on my door, demanding I move my truck, and then me politely refusing. There was no argument, no confrontation. Just a conversation. When the video ended, the officers didn't need to say much. They exchanged another look, and then Officer Matthews spoke up. "Well, Karen," he said, his voice measured but firm, "it seems like there's been a misunderstanding here. We don't see any signs of a disturbance or a threat." Karen's face flushed a deep shade of red. She opened her mouth to protest, but Matthews held up a hand, cutting her off. "We'll be back to check in on the situation later, but for now, you should probably head home," Officer Matthews said, his tone more like an order than a suggestion. "Aye." Karen sputtered, but no more words came out. She took one last, seething look at me and then spun on her heel, storming off down the street without another word. The officers turned back to me. "Sorry about this, sir," Officer Thompson said, his voice apologetic but still calm. "We're just doing our job, but it looks like everything checks out on your end." "Yeah, no problem," I said, trying to hide my frustration. "I didn't do anything wrong." As the officers walked back to their cars, I leaned against the door, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. But just as I thought the situation was over, I noticed something strange. A glint in the corner of my driveway, near the garbage bins. Something wasn't right. It was small, metallic, and out of place. What the hell was Karen up to now? The morning arrived in an awkward haze, a blend of exhaustion and adrenaline that kept me from falling back into a proper sleep. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, I tossed the covers off and sat up, still reeling from the events of the night before. I went straight to the window, a little wary of what I might see, but nothing seemed out of place. My truck sat there, parked just as I had left it. The driveway was empty, the street was quiet, and the neighborhood looked as serene as it ever did at dawn. But the unease from the previous night lingered in the air, a heavy cloud I couldn't shake. I ran through the events of the night again in my head. Karen knocking at my door, demanding I move my truck, her sudden call to the cops, and her bizarre claims of being threatened. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like there was something I was missing. Karen didn't act like someone who'd just been wronged. She had a practiced calm about her, a little too much composure for someone who'd supposedly been threatened at her own doorstep. I grabbed my phone and decided to take a quick walk outside to clear my head. The neighborhood was still mostly asleep, save for a few joggers and early risers getting their coffee. I walked past Karen's house, but there was no sign of activity. No bustling brunch prep, no guests arriving. Nothing that matched the grand engagement brunch she'd talked about. It seemed strange, but then again, what did I really know about Karen's life? She was the HOA president, sure, but that didn't make her an open book. I kept walking, turning the corner to the next street when I saw Debbie, a neighbor who lived 2 houses down. She was out walking her dog as usual, and waved me over. I stopped for a moment, exchanging pleasantries, but I was itching for information. "Hey, Debbie, have you heard anything about Karen's brunch? I thought she was having guests over last night." Debbie raised an eyebrow and gave me a strange look. "Brunch? The only thing I've heard about Karen's daughter is that they're not speaking. Haven't been for a while. Not sure where she got the idea she was hosting a big brunch this weekend." I froze. "Wait, what do you mean they're not speaking?" Debbie lowered her voice. "Oh yeah. Apparently, her daughter's been distancing herself for the past 2 years. Some family drama, I'm guessing. It's all over the neighborhood, but Karen's always acting like everything's peachy. I'm not sure why she'd suddenly throw a brunch, unless she's trying to save face or something. It's the first time I've heard of it." The words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't heard anything about family drama or estranged relationships, and I certainly hadn't seen any indication that Karen was pretending to be a loving mother hosting a perfect weekend. It all felt so manufactured, like she was weaving a story in her head to make herself look good. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine as a thought struck me. What if the guests Karen had been referring to weren't family at all? What if they were just a cover for something else entirely? Did she mention any other details about the guests? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, but inside, my mind was already spinning with possibilities. Debbie shook her head. "Not really. She's not one to give much away, you know that. But I can tell you this, she's been acting weird lately. I've seen her sneaking around her property late at night a few times, carrying what looked like a toolbox or something. Definitely not the kind of thing you'd bring out for a simple brunch." I felt a chill spread through me. There it was again. Something off about Karen's late-night activities. That couldn't be a coincidence. The thought of Karen sneaking around with tools or something hidden made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just about the parking anymore. It was bigger than that. I thanked Debbie, trying to hide my growing anxiety, and walked back to my house, deep in thought. I had to know what was really going on. I had to find out if Karen was hiding something, and what that something could be. As soon as I was inside, I went straight to my security cameras. I started scrolling through the footage from the night before. The usual footage from the driveway was nothing extraordinary, just my truck parked, me coming in and out, all perfectly normal. But then I dug deeper, going back through the night before Karen knocked. It was around sharp 1:30 a.m. when I saw something strange. Karen, in the dim light, was creeping down my driveway, moving stealthily between my truck and the garbage bins. She was holding something small and metallic in her hands, almost like a set of tools, and she seemed to be working. At least, that's what it looked like. She spent a solid 10 minutes in my driveway before finally disappearing around the corner. I froze, staring at the screen. What was she doing? Why was she out there? Was she trying to mess with my truck or plant something on my property? I paused the footage. There was no denying it. Karen had been up to something suspicious, and it wasn't just a late-night parking dispute. I needed to find out more. I wasn't about to let her drag me into some scheme without knowing exactly what was going on. Karen was dangerous, manipulative, and now I had a feeling she was up to more than just playing the victim. I started making a plan. Something told me that this story wasn't going to end quietly, and I wasn't about to let her get away with whatever game she was playing. Not this time. I spent the rest of the morning trying to shake off the sense of unease that had crept in. The footage of Karen sneaking around my driveway, clutching what looked like a toolbox or some other suspicious object, kept replaying in my mind. It was the kind of thing that should have made me feel better. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't misread the situation. But instead, it just made everything feel even weirder. What had she been up to? And why? I needed answers, but I wasn't about to make another move until I had something concrete. I was careful not to jump to conclusions too quickly, but I had a sinking feeling that whatever Karen was involved in went far beyond some petty parking dispute. It was like I was missing a piece of the puzzle, a piece I had to find if I was going to stop her from pulling me deeper into whatever web she was trying to weave. I decided to go to Frank's house. Frank was a retired neighbor who'd served as the HOA treasurer for years before stepping down last summer. He was a quiet guy, never one to stir up drama, but he had a knack for remembering the little things. Maybe he could shed some light on Karen's recent behavior. If there was anyone who might know about the inner workings of the HOA, it was Frank. I knocked on his door and waited. Frank answered a few moments later, squinting in the sunlight. He had that tired look about him, the kind that comes with age and too many early mornings, but his mind was sharp as ever. "Hey, Frank, got a minute?" I asked, trying to keep it casual. "Sure, come on in," he said, stepping aside to let me in. His house was cozy, lined with old bookshelves filled with what I assumed were decades of memories. He had a small kitchen nook where he sat enjoying his cup of coffee. I pulled up a chair across from him, trying to keep my voice steady. "So, I've been dealing with some weirdness with Karen lately," I began. "She's been causing some trouble, and I'm starting to think there's more going on than just her usual HOA drama." Frank's eyebrows shot up. "Karen? What kind of trouble?" I quickly recounted the events of the past couple of days, the late-night knock on my door, her strange behavior, the cops being called, and the footage I'd found of her sneaking around my driveway. I watched as Frank listened intently, his expression growing darker as I spoke. When I finished, he set down his coffee mug and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Well, I'll tell you what I know," he said, his voice low. "Karen's always had a complicated relationship with the HOA. When I was still serving as treasurer, she started making a lot of decisions that didn't add up. She'd authorize large payments for landscaping, community events, things like that. But when I went through the records, there was no trace of any of these events happening. No receipts, no contractors, nothing. And I wasn't the only one who noticed." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you saying she's been stealing from the HOA?" Frank nodded. "I can't say for sure, but there's a lot that doesn't add up. In the last few months, she's been acting even stranger. I know she's been under pressure, but it's like she's trying to cover her tracks. I think the HOA is missing a lot more than anyone realizes." I leaned forward, my mind racing. "Do you think Karen's been using the HOA money for personal stuff? Or something else?" Frank didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked over to a cabinet near the kitchen, pulling out an old folder. He opened it, revealing a series of documents, old financial records, invoices, and a few photos of meetings. He pointed to a few pages, his finger tracing lines of text. "Take a look at this," he said. "The numbers don't line up. There's been money disappearing from the HOA account, and it's been happening for months. She's been siphoning it off into a separate account, and I think she's trying to cover it up by creating distractions, like the brunch she was supposedly having this weekend. It's all a smokescreen. A cold sense of realization washed over me. Everything, the parking request, the late-night visits to my house, wasn't just about some personal vendetta against me. It was part of a bigger plan, one that had been unfolding right under our noses. And I had a feeling I was in the middle of it now, whether I liked it or not. Frank handed me the folder, and I scanned the documents quickly, trying to make sense of the numbers. There was a pattern I could see now, a slow, steady drain of HOA funds, disguised as expenses for community upkeep. It all pointed back to Karen. But why was she bringing me into this? Why target me? I closed the folder and looked at Frank. How do you know all this? I've been doing my own digging, Frank admitted, his voice quiet. When I left the HOA, I couldn't just walk away from all the strange things that were happening. I kept an eye on the finances, and it's clear there's something shady going on. I just couldn't prove it, not until now. I sat back, letting the weight of the situation settle in. So what do we do now? Frank hesitated. We need to get this information into the right hands. But we also need to be careful. Karen's not going to let this go easily. And if she's cornered, she'll do anything to protect herself. Just as the words left his mouth, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, and a message from my Ring app popped up. It was a notification. Someone was on my property again. I checked the live feed and froze. Karen. She was back, and this time she was carrying something I couldn't quite make out. Large, heavy-looking, and wrapped in a cloth. She made her way down the driveway again, the same route as before. But this time she was moving with more purpose, heading directly for the area where I'd seen her the night before. Without thinking, I stood up. I've got to go. She's here again. Frank nodded. Be careful. I don't think she's done yet. I bolted out the door, my heart hammering in my chest. Karen was playing a dangerous game, and I was done being her pawn. This was it. I was going to confront her once and for all, and I wasn't leaving until I got some answers. I rushed to the driveway, trying to stay quiet, but the sound of my footsteps on the gravel gave me away. Karen turned, her eyes flashing in the darkness. She froze for a moment, then smiled, an eerie, cold smile that sent a shiver down my spine. You really think you can stop me? She said, her voice low, almost taunting. You don't know who you're messing with. Before I could respond, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance. I don't need to stop you, I said, taking a step closer. I just need to make sure the truth comes out. And just like that, everything changed.